You probably know that running various Rails commands can be a little slow. Here I am in a brand new Rails application, and let's try running a generator. And let's make an article with a name, and notice that there's several seconds before we even get any output here. I usually edit out that wait time, same for if we do the migrations here. Anyway, I usually edit out this wait time when I'm doing these screencasts because there are several seconds of it starting up the Rails application whenever you're running any commands. This is probably most noticeable when running tests because you likely want to do those quite often. And here we're just getting no output here for quite a long time because it is starting up the Rails app. And this wait time will grow as your application grows. Now in this episode, I want to show you a few different tools that you can use to make these commands run much faster. The first one here is Zeus. This will preload your Rails application so that you can run commands against it nearly instantly. It does have some fairly strict requirements here though, a recent version of OS X or Linux, and a Ruby 193 with a backported garbage collection patch. I've been running it without the patch, and it seems to work great, but you may find it necessary if you have limited RAM. To get it installed, just run gem install Zeus, and don't add it to your gem file because it's designed to run outside of bundler through the Zeus command. So just run Zeus start after that, and that will start up, basically preload your Rails application, and you can see this changing as the Rails app is loading. It changed to green for most of this because that is valid and up and running so that we can run these commands against our preloaded Rails app. Let me open up another tab here. Now if we run a generator, let's instead of running Rails generate, we can run Zeus generate, and let's generate a new model here, and that will run nearly instantly, as you can see here. Same for rake db migrate. Instead of doing that, we'll want to prefix this any rake commands with Zeus, and that will run very fast. And if we run the tests, Zeus rake test, that will also run much faster than it did before. Now we can also run a specific test file or directory through Zeus test. Let's run the functional directory, and that is very fast. So this is really awesome. Since we don't have to start up our Rails app every time we run one of these commands, the output is just so fast using Zeus here. Because the way it works is that it's preloading Rails in the different environments, development and test, and if we had Cucumber set up in this app, it would work for that as well. So that way we can run any of those related commands on that preloaded environment. Now Zeus is also smart about reloading any changes, so if we do make a change to a model, for example, then it's going to be picked up automatically. We don't have to reload Zeus. Now let's compare the time difference with and without Zeus. If I run bundle exec rake db migrate, this will be without Zeus, and so since it starts with the Rails app, it took about 3 seconds there. And if we run it with Zeus, then it takes less than half a second, so Zeus does give us quite a big savings. Now this time will change a lot depending on the size of your app and your computer setup, so I encourage you to try it for yourself. One thing that's really nice with this setup is that you can better integrate Rails commands into your editor for really fast feedback. For example, here I am in a controller test, and let's say I want to run this specific test. I just put my cursor here and then run a given bundle command, and there's the output. That test passes. However, if I make a change here, I may save it and then run it again, then we get a failure. So a really fast feedback here through Zeus. Now I'm just using a custom TextMate bundle command for this. It's just really simple. It just CDs into the TextMate's project directory and then runs a Zeus test on that given file and line number. Now one thing to be aware of if you're using Zeus is that it generates a Zeus socket file at the root of your project, and you'll probably not want to check this into your Git repository. So I recommend just echoing it into your .gitignore file, or you might want to put this in your global .gitignore file if you have multiple projects using this. So that's a quick overview of Zeus. It's one way to speed up your Rails commands, but it's certainly not the only way. Now let's take a look at a couple more options. Another similar tool is Spring, which will also speed up commands by preloading a Rails app. It does have a few notable differences though. Let me show you. To get it installed, just run gem install Spring. And then we can run the Spring command much like we did with Zeus. This allows us to run Rails and rake tasks through it. However, one big difference is that it will automatically boot up your Rails app in the background on the first command. So let's say we run a Spring and then let's run a Rails generate. Let's generate a user model with a name. And so this one will take a little while because it's going to boot up the Rails app. But then each Spring command run after that will be nearly instant because it's happening on the process that's already booted up. And let's try running some tests through this. Running the functional tests happens very fast. So this is really great. We don't have to worry about starting up our Rails app ahead of time to use this, and if we want to stop it at any time, just run a Spring stop, or just close the terminal session and it'll stop it. Another nice feature of Spring is that it's very configurable. You can easily change how the preloading works, and also what directories are watched for file changes. However, one thing to watch out for is that it doesn't use fs-event by default to detect file changes. It's going to pull 5 times a second. Instead, you might want to add this to your gem file so that it will use fs-event. That is if you're on macOS 10 or iNotify for Linux. Let's move on to the last tool I want to show you here, which is Commands by David Hannemeyer Hansen. This is much simpler and doesn't try to do anything fancy like preloading your Rails app in the background. It's basically just a way to run various Rails commands from within a loaded console. Let's give this a try. This one is designed to be added to your gem file called Commands, and let's specify the group to be the development and test environments. And then of course run the bundle command to install it, and then we can open up the Rails console, and here this will take a little while as normal because it is booting our Rails app. But then once this is loaded, we can run various generators and rake tasks. So let's generate a new model. Let's call it author and give it a name, and that is very fast. And we can run rakedb migrate, and that is very fast as well. Now we unfortunately can't run our tests from within here because we're in the development environment, so let's start up our console under the test environment. Now before running the tests here, let me run the rakedb migrate command again because our test database wasn't migrated. So now we can run the tests through the test command, which we can specify any directory under the test directory. So let's use functional, so it'll run all the controller specs, and it looks like they all passed. However, notice that this output is pretty noisy because it's showing all the SQL queries being performed. If you want to remove that, you can run active record base .logger, and let's just set it to nil, and let's run our tests again, and this time reduces that noise. I don't think RSpec is supported yet in this commands gem, but I believe support is planned in the future. Now I want to finish up here by quickly mentioning Spork, which I covered in episode 285. This is designed to speed up your test environment by preloading Rails, so it works similar to the other tools I've shown you, but it's a little bit dated now, and it also doesn't support other Rails commands. But if some of the other tools don't quite do what you want or need, then you might want to use Spork. Especially if you're using Windows or JRuby. I don't think the other tools I've shown you support those environments, but I believe Spork does. Well, that's it for this overview of various tools to quickly run Rails commands. So if you're tired of sitting here waiting for your Rails app to load to run a command, give them a try. Thanks for watching. I have often been asked how to create a user activity feed in Rails, like the one you can find on GitHub here. This is great for social networking style applications, so we can see what other users have been up to. First of all, let me show you what I've got so far. This is a cookbook application where users can share recipes. They can create a new recipe, or edit their own recipes, or add comments to them, or they can even mark other users as friends. So I'm currently signed in here, so I can add this user as a friend. And what I would like to do is add an activity page to this application where I can see all the activity of my friends to see what they've been up to, whether it be posting new recipes or adding comments. Here I'm going to show you how to accomplish this using the public activity gem. And kudos to the author, it has some really great documentation, but let me walk you through the setup quickly here. The first thing I'll do is go into the gem file of my app and add the public activity gem here, and you'll need to run the bundle command to install it. Next, you'll need to run a generator provided by the gem called public activity migration. And then we can run that migration. So what this will do is create an activities table because it has an active record model for managing it. Now, public activity is also compatible with Mongoid, and these steps aren't necessary there. Check out the documentation for details on that setup. The next step is to go into any model that you want to track the activity of, such as our recipe model here, and include this module called public activity model. And then you can call tracked after that, and what that will do is set up some callbacks to automatically create some activity records after this model is created, updated, or destroyed. So I'm going to do this in the comment model as well because I want to track comments in this app. So with what I have so far, if I do anything to this app, such as add a comment, then it's going to be automatically tracked by public activity. Now all I need to do is make a page that displays this activity. So I'll generate a new controller for this page. Let's call it Activities and give it an index action. Next, I'll go into the routes file for this app because I need to do some cleanup here. Instead of the route that was generated, I want a resource route called Activities, so it will set up the path to the Activities controller that was generated. So what I want in here is to list out all the activities that are provided by the gem. To do that, we can call public activity, and that will return the active record model so we can query the database like we would normally. Let's order the results by the created at in descending order so that the most recent activities show up first, and let's store this in an instance variable. Now we just need to loop through this in the views, so let's call this friends activities, and then let's go through that activities. And so for each of these, let's just for now inspect this activity to see what's involved. Now visiting /activities brings up our page with our activity inspection, and here we can kind of see the different attributes that are assigned. We have something called trackable ID and trackable type columns on the database, which means that this is a polymorphic type association, so this knows it's a comment model that is tracking. Now there are a couple of other polymorphic associations on here as well. There's recipient and owner. Now owner is the user that performed the action, so we'll want to fill this in so that we can display the user's name next to their activity. Let's do that next. Now I mentioned earlier that this gem uses callbacks in the model to record the activity, but that presents a problem because the model layer doesn't have access to the current user, so how do we set the owner when we record the activity? Well, public activity has a workaround for this problem. Let's go to the application controller, and then at the top of this class, let's include a module called public activity store controller, which will record the controller on each request, allowing us to access it on the model. So going back to the comment model, we can do this by adding an option to the tracked call called owner, and if we set this to lambda, this will be evaluated each time it tracks activity, and this will pass in the controller and the model as an argument, so that's going to be the comment model. So that way we can set this owner to the controller's current user. Now this does present a little problem though. Current user is a private method on our controller, so it's not considered an action. You can see that on our application controller here. There's our current user method. So let's move this outside of the private call, and then we can call hide action current user, so that way it's not considered a controller action. Now another potential issue is that in the model, this is going to raise an exception if we try to create a record outside of the current request because there won't be a controller. So you'll probably want to check if controller is not nil before sending the current user method. Overall, I'm not really a fan of this workaround because it feels kind of ugly accessing the controller in the model, and we have sort of ugly edge cases like this. But it works for now, so let's just copy this into the recipe model. Now let's give this a try by making a new comment. And now if we go to the activities page, we can see there are actually two records here, and the first one in the list is actually the most recent, which is going to include the owner ID now. So let's fix up this view so it nicely displays the activities. So back in our activities template, I'll remove this inspection and make a div with the class of activity. And the first thing I want to do here is display the user's name and a link. So that's going to be the activity owner. And let's only display that if we actually have an activity owner, because we do have that nil record still in there. And then next I want to describe the activity, which can be a little bit difficult because each one is unique. But for now I'm just going to hard code this for adding a comment. So let's say added comment to, and then I want to display the name of the recipe inside of here. So to do that, to grab the recipe record, we need to go through activity.trackable, because remember that's that polymorphic association which will reference the model that activity is for, in this case the comment model, so we can call recipe on that, and then we can link to that recipe. Now I would like to add some styling for this, so let me do that really quickly here. I'll just paste in some CSS. And if I reload this page, then we get our activities. So the top one here shows the name with the user. This one doesn't because the user record was nil. So this is looking pretty good, but we're currently hard coding this description, so how do we change it depending on the type of activity? Well, we can use a helper method provided by the gem. So instead of doing this here, we can call render activity and then pass it the activity record. And what this will do is render out a partial for this specific activity action. And this will look in a directory called public activity under views. And then inside of here, we need to make a new directory for each different model that we're tracking. So in this case, a comment model. And then we can make a new partial called create.html.arb. And then we can describe this activity like we did before, but now we can define additional partials for the different types of activities. There we go. I've added a separate partial for each activity we track, create, update, and destroy on each of the models, comments, and recipes. And I've also performed some activities off camera so we can see what they look like. Now everything looks good, except what if I try to remove a record? For example, if I destroy this recipe that was created, then go to the activities page again, well, I get this exception. And the issue is that I'm saying that we added a recipe and referring to activity.trackable, but this is going to be nil because we destroyed the record. So it's important that in every activity partial where you're referring to activity.trackable that you take into consideration that it might not exist. So let's wrap this in an if-else condition to make sure that activity.trackable exists, and then we can perform that, or else say which has since been removed or something like that. And now reloading this page, it will work, and it says that we added a recipe which has since been removed. Alright, next I want to show you how you can exclude certain actions. For example, updating comments aren't really that interesting and we might not want to show them in the activities. What we can do is pass in an option to the tracked column the comment model, either accept or only is allowed, so we can say accept update, and that way we only get the create and destroy activities on our comment model. However, this tracked method is starting to get pretty complex with all these options, and I honestly don't really like performing activity tracking through callbacks on the model. So instead, I much prefer to handle the tracking through the controller instead of the model. So to do that, we can include the public activity common module instead of the model module, and then disable the tracking here so it doesn't automatically add activities through callbacks. And next we can go into the comments controller. And whenever we successfully save or destroy a comment, we can record that activity by calling comment.createActivity, and then passing in the activity name such as create, and then we can pass in any other options such as the owner and setting it to the current user. I like to do this much more because it gives us a lot more control over when and how the activities are created, and it means we don't have to do that workaround for setting the current user. And so let's do this for destroying the comment as well. And this also makes it nice because you can create custom activities very easily. All right, I think our activities are looking really good now. One more thing to finish this up, though, is that we're supposed to be displaying our friends' activities instead of everyone's activities. I can do that by adding a scope to our activities controller, calling where here. We can say we want our owner ID to be within the current user friend IDs, and because owner can be a polymorphic association, it's probably a good idea to make sure the owner type matches user as well. So now I don't see any friend activities, but if I log out and log in as another user, and then if I add me as a friend, then I can go to the activities page, and there the activities show up because I'm a friend. Well, that's it. I think this activity page is done. You probably want to add the time the activity took place and some icons and such to pretty it up. Now, there are some things that I didn't go over about the public activity gem, so be sure to check out the README for further information on that. That's it. Thanks for watching.